Hello. Welcome to this edition of Monday webinar. We are at the penultimate session. My name is Ellie Gettinger, and I'm the Director of Digital Learning for the Jewish Theological Seminary. I'm delighted to be joined today by Rabbi Eliezer Diamond, who is going to share with us paradigms of friendship, what philosophers and rabbis can teach us. This is part of our series, Two Are Better Than One, Friendship in Jewish Texts, Life and Thought. And this has been a really interesting series at a really challenging time, because I think one of the things that is challenging in this moment is this sense of who's with us, who's for us, how do we respond to those in difference with us, how do we engage, and what does it mean to be a friend, how do we really support? And each one of these sessions has built on different elements of those themes. And certainly today, as we look at rabbis and philosophers, we're going to go back to some of the Aristotle pieces that were previously developed in small part. Today, we'll be looking at it in a very different way. So again, if you're new to Monday webinar, we're excited that you've chosen to join us for your first time. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of give you a sense of the process. Rabbi Diamond is going to be speaking, and then there'll be some breaks throughout for questions. You can chat your questions to me, Ellie Gettinger. It's Ellie Gettinger Q&A on the chat. And I will be asking them during a couple of different spots. Because of the number of questions that we get, I'd appreciate if you can make them complete thoughts. If you're referring to something, let me know exactly what you're referring to so I don't have to clarify with you. And any help you can give me in that area is very much appreciated. With that, I'm going to introduce our august speaker. Since this is philosophical, I feel like august is the right word. Before I do that, I actually have to let you know that sponsorships are available for these series. We don't have a sponsor today, but if any of you are so inspired, there will be a link in the chat, and you can make a donation for the next session, which is happening, or for our next series, which will start after the new year. And we appreciate all of your donations and support to JTS. And if you have technical questions, that's where you go to Lynn and Stacy, my colleagues. They're also co-hosts of this program. The sources will be shared and have been shared with you by email, but they will also be shared on screen. So if you don't want to have them up yourself, we'll be sharing them as well. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Eliezer Diamond. He is the Rabbi Judah Nadich Professor of Talmud and Rabbinics at the Jewish Theological Seminary. He teaches courses in Rabbinics and Talmud studies. He's written extensively on prayer, issues of environmental law and ethics, and his most recent work, which is long awaited and is soon going to be in publication, is an edition of Louis Ginsburg's teaching on the Jerusalem Talmud. And we are so excited, as always, to have Rabbi Diamond with us sharing his Torah. And I think this is a particularly salient topic, and I cannot wait to learn with you.
Thank you very much, Ellie. The book that Ellie mentioned, the edition of Professor Louis Ginsburg's commentary on the Jerusalem Talmud, Tractate Psachim, it's rather a recondite work, which is a perfect word to describe a work like that. When I told my father what I was working on, his reaction was, "Who the hell is going to read that?" And indeed, it's for a very specialized audience, and I've been working on it for a long time, and I'm glad that I'm going to publish it. But that's not the kind of thing that we're going to be doing today. Actually, what we're going to do, this often happens. You're asked for a title and a description, and you think you have it, and you do. But when I sat down to prepare this, I realized that I wanted to go in a slightly different direction, in a way, the opposite of what I had said initially, but also not. And what I mean by that is, rather than looking at rabbinic and philosophical sources separately, I want to fuse them. And I want to see how, by looking at them together, we can come up with some insights about what constitutes friendships. Really, I want to deal with 4 questions, looking at different types of friendships, what qualities are important for establishing and maintaining friendships, what causes friendships to unravel, and what happens when you realize that you have to let go of a friendship. How do you know that, and how should you do that? So these are all important questions. Now we're going to be looking at these questions through theoretical lenses, writings of the philosophers and the rabbis. But my hope is that we can use this study as for a process of reflection on our own friendships. What are they like? What are they about? How perhaps can we make them better friendships? Cicero's work on friendship, and we're going to read some excerpts from it, is called simply How to Be a Friend. So maybe that's a good title for what we're about to do. How to be a friend. How can we be a good friend? So we're going to start with a Mishnah. I mean, the rabbis, I'm sorry. Sorry, I was about to leave out. No, sorry. Take that down, please. Sorry about that, Stacy. Sorry, stepped on my own foot there. Before, as they say, before I start talking, I want to say a few words. So I actually want to provide somewhat of an introduction before we get into the sources themselves. So the only sustained discussions of friendship, starting in antiquity until relatively recent times, are among the Greek and Roman philosophers and among Christian writers, not among Jews. In other words, we find scattered statements in the Bible and in rabbinic sources about friendship, but we don't really have what we have in other writers, sort of a taxonomy of friendship and a detailed discussion of what is friendship, what are the important characteristics of friendship. And what we're going to do is take disparate rabbinic statements and create a portrait out of those statements. Now, a book that summarizes discussions of friendship by philosophers and Christian writers is Kevin Vost's The Four Friendships, which I think is in the chat. Among Jews, the first sustained discussion of friendship comes in the 17th century, written by Leon or Yehuda of Modena, who's a Venetian rabbi, very idiosyncratic individual. He was a rabbi, he was a halachic authority, he was a preacher, he was a chazan, he was a poet, and he was also an inveterate card player. Fair to say that he had a gambling addiction, as he himself acknowledged. He was also the first Jew to write an autobiography. And in the autobiography, he writes a great deal about his struggles, mostly unsuccessful, at trying to stay away from the card table. And he gets him in a lot of trouble, but that's another story. But if you're interested, read his autobiography. It's a great read. Anyway, I diverge. So I digress. So Leon of Modena writes a work called Tzemach Tzadik, the flower of the righteous, which is a sustained discussion of friendship. But even this book is actually simply a Hebraized and Judaized edition of an Italian work called Fior di Virtù. And what he's done is he's translated the work and taken out some of the explicit Christian references and brought in Jewish ones. But he still retains a lot of the classical references. So even in the 17th century, where we have something from Leon of Modena, it's still not an original Jewish work. Okay. So we're going to look at both philosophical and Jewish sources. And as I said, fuse them and try to create a total picture. Okay, Stacy, so now we're ready to roll. And the first source that we're looking at is a Mishnah in Avot, Ethics of the Fathers. Joshua ben Parachia, Nitai the Arbalite, we received the oral tradition from them. Just a reminder that the first chapter, and not just the first chapter, of Ethics of the Fathers presents us with a chain of tradition. Starting at Sinai, it presents us with those people who have carried forward the tradition, and it mentions teachings that are attributed to each person who is a link in the chain. And so here we have two links, and Joshua ben Pracha used to say, appoint for yourself a teacher, aseh lecha rav, and acquire for yourself a companion, knei lecha chaver, and judge all men with the scale weighted in his favor. Avidan kol adam l'kav zechu. So much has been made of the fact that it says, make yourself a teacher and acquire yourself a friend. We're not going to get into that now, but for our present purposes, we're just going to note that this Mishnah presents as a desideratum to acquire a friend. Chaver is the word that's generally used in Rabbinic Hebrew for friend. Doesn't only mean that, but it comes from a root that means connection. So chaver is someone with whom I've had a connection. And what we'll see is that there are different kinds of connection. We also should say, before we proceed to looking at the different kinds of friendships, that early in biblical tradition, and there is also, the sentiment is also reflected in rabbinic tradition, is the belief that connection is essential to human life. Remember that before God creates Eve, he says, or God says, Lo tov hayot adam levado, eseh lo ezer kenegdo. It is not good for a person to be by oneself. I have to create a helpmeet. So at the very beginning of creation, it is noted that people are meant to be together. Now, in that case, it's talking about a man and a woman, but this is true in general. And the rabbis present this thought by saying, O chavruta, O mituta, and I'm going to translate it as a paraphrase of a declaration attributed to Patrick Henry. Give me fellowship or give me death. That's basically what that statement means. So it is a very strongly held sentiment that friendship is important, and that's being affirmed in this Mishnah. Now we just have one problem, which is, what do we mean by friendship? And so now we're going to look at source B, where Rambam, Maimonides, in his Mishnah commentary on the Mishnah that we just saw, basically rehearses something that apparently was taught in a previous session, Aristotle's classification of different kinds of friendships. But whereas for Aristotle, there are three friendships, for Rambam, although he lists three, in effect, he turns them into four kinds of friendships. And he says, and there are three types of friends: a friend for benefit, a friend for enjoyment, and a friend for virtue. So what are each of these? Indeed, a friend for benefit is like the friendship of two business partners and the friendship of a king and his retinue. And when I was preparing this, when I thought about this, I thought about my mechanic, John. Of course, notice how I say my mechanic. Actually, it turns out that he's a mechanic for a lot of people, not just me. But even saying my mechanic implies a sort of personal connection. And he and I, a very pleasant relationship. Sometimes we ask about each other's families. Sometimes he'll do me a favor. He'll say, you need a new part, but I think I can get a used part that'll be a lot cheaper than getting a new part. So we have a very nice relationship, and I think he's a very good mechanic. But if I didn't own a car, I probably would not have a relationship with him. We come from very different worlds. He's Greek Orthodox. He's more of a hands-on person, on books and words person. But we do have this relationship. It's based on mutual benefit. I need my car fixed. He needs to make a living. And in that process of having that connection, again, it can be a pleasant process, and it doesn't have to be totally transactional, but at root, it's based on what I get from the relationship and what John gets from the relationship. And now Rambam continues. Whereas the friendship for enjoyment is of two kinds, a friend for pleasure and a friend for confidence. And I would almost say confidence is security. When we explain it, it'll be clearer. So Rambam says, indeed, the friend for pleasure is like the friendship of males and females and similar to it. So for Rambam, when he thinks about a pleasurable relationship, a relationship that yields pleasure, he thinks about a heterosexual relationship, presumably marriage. When we finish going through all this list, I want to return to this because this example comes out partially of Rambam's essentially negative view of women. And so it's hard for him to imagine a friendship between men and women that is based on anything other than pleasure. But as we know, it ain't necessarily so. And let me state, I should have stated this at the outset, but let me state it now, that really it'd be more helpful to regard these not as three kinds of friendships in this very fixed way. These are different aspects of friendship. And as we will see, within one friendship, two or three or all of these aspects can be contained. But okay, Rambam's example of friend for pleasure is basically marriage or relationship between males and females. But we can all think of examples of friendship for pleasure. If you're friends, you always go to the theater. You always go to the movies. You have a friend you go to ball games with. You play cards with people. Whatever it may be. These are our friends for pleasure. You get together with them because you have in common a desire to do something that gives you pleasure. Okay, let's move to the next slide, please. Okay, so now Maimonides Rambam continues, whereas the friend for confidence is when a man has a friend to whom he can confide his soul, person with whom I feel safe sharing secrets or information that I want kept private, sometimes things I'm not that proud of. He will not keep anything from him, not in action and not in speech. And he will make him know all of his affairs, the good ones and the disgraceful, without fearing from him that any loss will come to him with all of this, not from him and not from another. As when a person has such a level of confidence in a man, he finds great enjoyment in his words and in his great friendship. So an example of that might be people who are part of a grief processing group, where you might not go out for dinner, but you have some shared intimacy. And part of that intimacy is that you share information with each other that you wouldn't share with other people. Or if you're part of a 12-step group, you're going to share information in the room that you're not going to share somewhere else. Again, are these also people that you go to the movies with? Maybe, maybe not. So if you think about it, if we stop here for a moment, you realize that the difference between the second or the second two kinds of friendship and the first, the major distinction is intimacy. Okay, with this first kind of friend, there's connection, but there's nothing intimate about that connection. My connection with John, the mechanic, is basically indistinguishable from John's connection to one of his other customers. When we're talking about these friendships, friendships for pleasure and friendships for security, there is an intimacy here, and I'm going to vet, and this is something that the philosophers talk about, probably going to vet these people before I enter into these relationships. There's an intimacy and an exclusivity in these kinds of friendships that we don't feel in other friendships. Okay. And finally, we come to a friend for virtue. So a friend for virtue, Maimonides says, is when the desire of both of them and their intention is for one thing, and that is the good. Well, that's a slippery word. What is the good? And it will mean something else, something different to different people. So among different elites, for Rambam basically is quoting Aristotle here. So the good will mean the pursuit of virtue and philosophical understanding. For the rabbis, this kind of friendship is the pursuit of Torah and understanding Torah. For the medieval mystics, this kind of friendship is that when I come close to a fellow mystic, in some sense, I'm able to see the face of God through my fellow mystic. For the Ba'alei Mussar, those who studied Mussar and still study Mussar, the idea is Tikkun Hamidot, that through my study of Mussar, which is about religious character development, with another person, I fix or I improve my personal characteristics. So the good can mean very different things. But the point of this friendship and what distinguishes it from other friendships is it's not based on a personal need or desire. It's based on the pursuit of something that transcends both me and my friend, some greater value that transcends the both of us. And let's just finish what I have to say and then have something else to say about this. And each one wants to be held by his friend in reaching this good for the both of them together. And this is the friend with which he commanded to acquire, This is when the Mishnah says acquire a friend, this is really the kind of friend that they have in mind. And it is like the love of the master for the student and the student for the master. And I think what this means is that in this kind of friendship, there is mutual aid in achieving this goal of achieving the good, however we define it. And so at any given moment in that kind of friendship, I can be the master and you can be the student, or you can be the master and I can be the student. And we'll see, we'll have more to say about that. But the idea is it's a mutual help relationship that helps us move towards the good. Now I want to say, for those of us reading this, first of all, we might find it annoying. You might feel that it's hierarchical and doesn't speak well of a lot of the friendships of what we usually call a friendship. Just want to put that on the table. But I also want to say that this third type of friendship, where we're searching the good, in modern terms, could be something like this. You and I are members of a synagogue, and we both are on the board, and we are both working hard to make the synagogue the best possible kind of organization. I think that is a friendship of the third type, that we are working together to create something that transcends both of us. If we work for some kind of cause, we are doing the same thing. So my point is that this third type of friendship doesn't have to involve Torah only, or philosophy, or Kabbalah, or Mussar. It describes a kind of friendship where part of what brings people together is some larger cause or set of values that animates them. Okay, let's stop for some questions.
So please feel free to share your questions with me. I think in terms of when you're reading biographies or autobiographies, that you really key in often, the authors often really key in on those friendships for the good, and the kind of stories of how people have changed the world. I'm reading the biography of Oppenheimer right now, and the friendship piece seems so essential to that. Do you feel like that Maimonides had this sense of this outside of the realm of learning and kind of have root to practice, and he saw it as being applied for communal purposes? Or do you think he really felt like this was in the realm of, this is for study and for the sake of God, but the sake of God doesn't necessarily mean for the sake of communal work?
Well, I'm going to say, unfortunately, my sense is that Rambam had a rather narrow or more restricted sense of what the good is, and that he would not necessarily see my examples of friendships of the good. But that's exactly why I gave those examples. I think it's really important when we study classical texts to be instructed by them and not paralyzed by them. So I take this last category as inspiring us to think about how, within the context of whatever friendship we have, do we, through that friendship, aspire to something beyond simply being together with that other person or not? But what that larger thing is, I don't think we should feel bound to say it's only Torah, it's only philosophy, it's only mysticism, or whatever it is. And that actually was exactly why I gave those other examples.
This was one of those questions that I was really grappling with as well. From what you said about Rambam, we take it that he would not consider a husband and wife could be friends aside from the idea of pleasure or sexual intercourse. Are there Jewish thinkers who did see, that women and men, husbands and wives, even if it's not even, could be friends and provided some sort of model of that?
Yes, Rashi is one, and actually, in a little bit, I'm going to hold off on that a little bit because there are three sources that I want us to look at, and I brought them in precisely to show that this is only one view and it's not the Jewish view. There never is the Jewish view. So indeed, and that's why I emphasized also that this view of marriage is shaped by Rambam's general attitudes, and I would say negative ones towards women, but it's not an attitude that's shared by all thinkers. And we'll see more about that.
So we'll get into that one a little bit more.
Yeah.
Is there a risk that friendship for virtue can decline into friendship for benefit? And the questioner gives this example of shaped by careerism or diluting the original aim, that you start with this friendship where you're sharing each other's aims, and then all of a sudden this changes. And is there any reflection on that?
Yes, and we will see one of the, I think it's Cicero who talks about this, but the short answer for now, and we'll return to it, is yes, right? Friendships can always change. And we'll see that part of the problem sometimes is also what I think the friendship is and what you think the friendship is. Sometimes we have different understandings of what the friendship is. So these are good questions. I'm very tempted to answer them now, but then I'll be stepping on my own toes here because we
don't want you to step on your own toes. I think a lot of our questions are in this kind of place of like defining how we feel, because I think there is this sense of maybe not discomfort, but there is this sense of ambivalence about identifying how we're friends with people. Is this a transactional friendship? Is this a friendship for the good? Is this just a friendship for pleasure and we don't have confidence? Like, where am I? And so I think there's a lot of these questions, like, for instance, this one is, what about friendships that fulfill needs? Let's say neighbors who cook or clean or babysit for an ill neighbor. Is that it for benefit? Because clearly someone's benefiting, or is it, how do we approach that? Like within this taxonomy, Are there just things that we need to be uncomfortable with?
Okay, so I'm going to say one thing, and then we're going to go to a text that deals with this. One is, and I alluded to this, but I think I have to be more explicit about this. Aristotle and Rambam are speaking hierarchically. Right? Remember, Rambam says that when the Mishnah says, acquire for yourself a friend, what the Mishnah is really talking about is this third kind of friend, this friend with whom you join pursuit of the good. And of course, the implication of that is that the other forms of friendship are somehow inferior. And I'm guessing that part of what is being reflected in the questions is some kind of anxiety about that. Am I being told that other kinds of friendship are inferior? So let me say again that I regard this descriptively, not prescriptively. This is describing the different kinds of friendships that exist. And there's room and a place and a need for all those kinds of friendships. Be silly for me to say, I will only bring my car to a mechanic who will study Aristotle with me. I'm not going to bring my car to just any old mechanic.
That might limit your mechanic selection.
It might, although he's Greek, by the way.
Oh.
So I don't know. But anyway, right. So I'm reading this in a non-judgmental way. I do not read this as a somehow indicting, that's not the word, but let's go with that word, people who have not achieved the highest friendship. I will say this, which is that one thing that Rambam is saying that I think is important is if our friendships consist only of what we might call transactional friendships and beneficial friendships or pleasurable friendships, then there is an aspect of life that we are not pursuing and that we could better pursue through friendship than on our own. I can better pursue becoming a better person or making the world a better place or studying Torah or whatever it is with someone else than on my own. And that's an important part of the message here. And that is a very rabbinic message. I quoted to you before. O chavruta o mituta. Without fellowship, there is death. So that's how I read it for myself. And I want to allay the anxieties of people. I don't know what Rambam would say to them. And honestly, I don't care. I'm just interested in using this constructively to understanding friendship and to being challenged by it. To what extent am I satisfied with sort of narrow friendships that don't improve me and others in the world? If I'm not doing any of that, maybe I should be looking for other kinds of friendships. Okay.
Let's keep going with your sources because I know there's so much more.
Yeah, let's move
already.
Okay, let's go. Okay, so we're moving to the next one, Stacy, and it might not be the next one. No. What happened to the one before? It looks messed up. Oh, there it is. Okay, so go to C, please. Okay, so this is a verse from the book of Malachi, late early Second Temple prophet. And I wanted to show you how he describes marriage. So what we're looking at, the next three sources that we're looking at, is a response to the way Rambam pigeonholes heterosexual relationships. And Malachi says that there are tears. Why? But you ask, because of what? Why are there tears? Because God is a witness between you and the wife of your youth with whom you have broken faith, though she is your partner and covenanted spouse. Eshet britecha. Now, using that expression, Eshet Britecha, covenanted spouse, is a very powerful formulation. And let me explain why. There is a difference between a partnership and a covenant. A partnership is a self-interested relationship. I get into a partnership because if you and I go into business together, we will make more money than if we didn't, let's say. Okay? It's basically about mutual benefit. And if the relationship ceases to be mutually beneficial, then that's it. We dissolve the partnership. A covenant is also a partnership, but it is a partnership that is dedicated to something that transcends the needs and the identity of the people who are creating that covenant, like the covenant that we create with God. And the way people understand this verse in Malachi is that the covenant between a man and a woman, between two partners, is something that transcends both of them and really is a model of the relationship that we have with God. It is a relationship where we both dedicate ourselves to creating something that transcends our personal needs. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Rabbi Rachel Adler, but she's created a new marriage ceremony, and she calls it Brit Ahuvim, a covenant of the beloved. And that is the same idea, to avoid regarding marriage as simply a transaction, but rather two like-minded people who care deeply about each other and about the world, creating a partnership that is full of love and generosity and purpose. And I'm trying to pack all of that into the phrase, Ve'eshet Britecha. So that is the model in this verse. And let's look at the next two sources. Okay, here I'm quoting from the sixth of the seven wedding blessings, the Sheva Brachot, and it begins, we say to God, Samach or Sameach Tisamach Re'im Ahuvim. Cause the beloved friends to rejoice. So think about this beautiful description of what it means to be in a marital relationship. You are friends who are beloved, who are loved by each other. So again, you have the sense of equality, of love, and not simply of two people fulfilling each other's desires or needs. Okay. And then finally, on this subject, Ecclesiastes in chapter 9 has a few verses talking about friendship. And one of them is very famous, Tovim Hashaim Min Ha'echad, two are better than one. And in the Midrash, in this particular Midrash says, who's Tovim Hashaim Min Ha'echad? Zo Ish V'Ishto. Okay, a paradigm of true friendship is a husband and a wife, a man and a woman in a relationship. This is a paradigmatic example of friendship. So Maimonides is one voice, but there are many others, and I just wanted to make sure that we heard some of those other voices. Okay, now let's move to F. And what's important about this source, this is from the Fathers according to Rav Natan, which is an accompaniment, a midrashic accompaniment to Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers. It cites passages in the Ethics of the Fathers and offers a commentary on those passages in the Mishnah. It's sort of a Talmud to the Mishnah that is Pirkei Avot. And what do we read here? And acquire for yourself a friend, which is stated in the Mishnah. How so? This teaches that a person should acquire a friend for himself who will eat with him and drink with him and study scripture and Mishnah with him and go to sleep with him and tell him all the secrets, both secrets of the Torah and secrets of the ways of the world. So let's just take that in for a moment. What is so interesting to me about this particular passage is that on the one hand, this passage is clearly talking about two Torah study partners. And that is an example of Aristotle's and Maimonides' third type of friend, right? This the virtue friend, pursuing the good. But notice in the description of this friendship here, you have all the different registers that we mentioned earlier. In other words, all the aspects of friendship that we described in all the different kinds of friendship are here, right? There's fellowship, eat and drink with somebody, have a good time with them, okay? Study, okay, that's the virtue aspect. Go to sleep with him. Honestly, I'm not 100% sure how to understand that. I don't think it means some kind of homosexual relationship, but does mean, in those days, people slept in close quarters. So it may simply mean that that's your bedmate. In Ecclesiastes, it says that one of the reasons that two are better than one is that when you're one, you're cold. When you have another person, it warms you up. So perhaps there's some sense here of just being with another person keeps you warm, and then tells all the secrets. Well, that's the friendship of security. So what's important about this text, I think, is, this, in a sense, is affirming what I said before, that there is a room for many different registers within one friendship. It doesn't have to be just one or the other. But again, I think the benefit of having a sense of the different kinds of friendship is having a certain clarity within a friendship of what the nature of that friendship is and what I'm bringing to it and what another person is bringing to it. Now, I want to continue reading this text because it expands upon something that we saw in Rambam's commentary. Rambam now says, Fathers according to Rabbi Nathan now says, for when they sit and engage in Torah together, and one of them makes a mistake in the law or the division of chapters, or declares an impure thing pure, or a pure thing impure, or a forbidden thing permitted, or forbidden thing forbidden, then his friend will correct him. And how do we know that when his friend corrects him and studies with him, that they will have greater reward for their studies? So again, they go to the go-to verse in Ecclesiastes, for it says, the two are better than the one, for they have great reward from their efforts. Now, what is being described here is what Eli Holzer, who has written on the Chevruta, a study on the Chevruta, and I'm sorry, Eli, I meant to get the name of that book and I don't remember it. Anyway, he has a book, it's a study of the Chevruta, and he talks about the following dynamic in a Chevruta. You're studying some passage together. There is supportive challenging, or challenging support. And what he means by that is that in a good Chavruta and in a good class between teacher and student, you push the other person to be the best that they can be in understanding and explaining the text. And so if someone explains the text and you say, well, you're not really being clear, or are you sure that's right? Because how about blah, blah, blah? Yeah, thanks. So, or how about blah, blah, blah? You're doing it in an ideal situation, if you're a good chavruta, if you're a good chaver, if you're a good friend, to help this person be a better student of the text. So you are challenging in order to support. The challenging is part of the education process and is part of the chavruta process. It's part of the friendship process. Good friends push each other at times to be better. Sometimes, unfortunately, you can observe in such a situation when people are studying together that people will question what other people say because they want to be right. They're actually not interested in helping the other person. They're just interested actually in their being right and the other person being wrong. And that is not a virtue-based friendship. But what is being described here is a virtue-based friendship. And I think what's important about this is it's telling us that to be a friend doesn't mean never to say anything challenging or negative. It's saying it with a constructive intention, okay? And let's move on to two other sources that talk about that. Actually, we're gonna skip G. Let's go to H. Okay. Maimonides in Mishnah Torah says, it is a mitzvah for a person who sees that his fellow Jew has sinned or is following an improper path to attempt to correct his behavior and inform him that he is causing himself a loss by his evil deeds. As Leviticus states, you shall surely admonish your colleague. So this is actually a general obligation, not just to a personal friend, but to the world at large. If I see someone going down the wrong path, it is my obligation to help them go back to the right path. And I just want to say, I mean, here we're talking about presumably in religious terms. You know, you're going off the derech, as they say. You are not observing some aspect of the Torah. But I think it's fair to say that in friendship, that applies broadly. You see someone about to make a deal, and you know that that probably will end badly for that person. Entering into a relationship, and you know something that suggests to you that it might end badly. If you're a true friend, you try to find a way of letting that person know, and that can be difficult. No question about it. Often people don't want to hear it. But that is one of the obligations of friendship, to the best of our ability, to steer our friends in the direction of being better people. Let's look at the next source, please. Okay. And this next source says something important, and it relates back to what I was talking about before, about supportive criticism or supportive challenging or challenging support. And Maimonides says, at first, a person who admonishes a colleague should not speak to him harshly until he becomes embarrassed. Okay? So if I'm going to admonish you, or I'm going to say to you, I think you're on the wrong road, I have to think carefully. How can I say it in a way that makes it clear that I'm saying this to you as a friend? I'm not saying this to you judgmentally. I'm not saying this to you adversarially. I'm saying it to you because I truly care about you. Easier said than done. We all know that. But what Maimonides is teaching us here is the fact that a person is subject to criticism doesn't give me carte blanche to criticize someone in a harsh and judgmental way. The point, it always has to be coming from a place of friendship. And what happens if I don't do that? What happens if I have a friendship where my friend does things that I know are wrong, says things that I know are wrong, and I say nothing? Well, if we look at the next source, yes, Cicero says to us, therefore, such a friendship, one that is based on flattery and insincerity, is nothing, since one person refuses to hear the truth while the other is eager to lie. Because essential to friendship is honesty, is being able to be honest with the other person. So if I'm afraid to tell someone of what I really think about what that person is doing, and I tell them, yeah, everything's great, what you're doing is great, that's not a true friendship, because what is missing from that friendship is honesty. And part of the honesty of friendship is calling a friend to account sometimes in a loving way as a friend, but still doing so. Okay, let's see. I think this is another time to stop for questions.
So I think that that's, it's interesting because, from the movie Love Story, it's love means never having to say you're sorry, but clearly friendship means finding, love doesn't mean that either. It was one of his stupidest lines.
That's one of the most inaccurate statements that I've ever heard, I have to
Right.
say.
I feel like love means having to say sorry in appropriate
Plenty,
ways all the
plenty.
time.
Yeah.
But what I would say is within the realm of this idea of constructive feedback in friendship, I think is one of the things that is most challenged in our kind of polarized, fraught moment, that we have friends who, and it's not this question of, they think they're right, we think we're right, and there's a chasm between us. What does that corrective look like if it's not this matter of, oh, your interpretation is wrong on this pasuk?
Right. So here too, we'll have something to say about this later on, but I will say for now, I think there's a difference between saying, yes, yes, absolutely, what you're saying is fine, on the one hand. On the other hand, saying, you're absolutely wrong and here's why. And then in the middle saying, well, we disagree. I don't agree with what you're saying. And you may conclude that that's the best that you can do. The rabbis have a very wise saying. I'll say it first in the original. Kishem shemitzvah lomar davar hanishma, kach mitzvah shelo lomar davar she'eino nishma. Just as it is a mitzvah to say things that will be heard, it is also a mitzvah not to say things that will not be heard. We need to know our audience. And if we know that by saying something to someone, they will not hear it, and in fact, I'll probably just cause, anger or worse, then there's no mitzvah to say it. What I think is a mitzvah is to be honest and not to give my friend the misimpression that I'm okay with whatever that person is saying. I mean, I'll give a personal example. This is not really from the realm of friends so much, but a parent-child relationship. So we have a son who's in the army in Israel. He's fine. And he calls us, he's an adult and he's growing. And sometimes he'll say, so this happened and I'm going to handle it in this and this way. And I'm saying to myself, no, man, do not do that. It's a bad idea. And I will try to gently suggest that maybe he could do it a different way. And then he will say, no, what I'm doing is right. And I'm doing it that way. And the way I will conclude that conversation is to say, listen, I'm not there. I understand you have to make the decision that you have to make. I respect it. I'm telling you what I think. I'm still sharing with you my perspective. So to me, that's a way of saying, understand, you're an independent being. You're not obligated to do what I say. Not a child and certainly not a friend. But I do have the obligation to say to you that I disagree. That's I think the right balance for that situation.
Where was that rabbinic source from? The one that you...
Oh gosh.
Sorry.
No.
It's
If I
not a
had
quiz.
2 brains and 4 sets of hands, I could separately locate it for you right now, but I can't. Sorry.
It's okay. Someone pointed out that we have this whole different universe of friendship now in a post-COVID Zoom and enhanced world. And she said, in this age of Zoom, I really appreciate the enlarged space for common learning, which I do regard as friendship in pursuit of a value, but she misses the in-person connections. Is it possible to have friendship without true physical connection, like to be in the same space? And there's something missing if it's just friendship in this kind of new liminal space?
Well, one thing we should remind ourselves of is a world in which friends were in constant physical contact with each other is a relatively new world. If you go back to the medieval world, there were a lot of friends who maintained their friendship through correspondence. They saw each other occasionally, not that often, but they were true friends. And they found a means of maintaining that friendship, which was correspondence, and then it became phone calls, and now it's whatever. We have a million ways of doing it. So, I think we often mourn the fact that we don't have more face-to-face time. I really don't want to litigate that. But what I do want to say is there are different ways of being friends, and maybe the best metric is the effort put into maintaining the connection in whatever way I do it. Again, I'll just give you a personal example, which is really, again, about parents and children, but it would apply to friends as well. I try every Erev Shabbat to call each of my children. It's not face-to-face, but okay. But I want in real time to give them a bracha for Shabbat. And also some of my grandchildren who are old enough, I do the same thing. Now, usually, I almost never hit everybody. And a lot of times it's only like 2 out of 7 or something like that. The ones I don't get through the phone call, I send them a text. And in that text, I put the bracha. So to me, that's a way of saying, yeah, ideally, we should be talking in real time. But even if we can't, what I'm telling you is, I'm making the effort to stay connected. And if I can't give you this bracha in real time, I'm giving it to you in the other way that I can. So to me, that's the measure. Am I making the effort? Am I doing what I can within the world in which we live to prioritize my friend and to make time to connect in whatever way possible?
And of course, because we are a community of learners and we're a community that can correct each other, Rachel Weinstein has pointed out that the source of the saying is Talmud Bavli Masechet Yevamot, page 65, side 2. So,
okay,
appreciation.
See, and that is chevruta, right? So here we're studying
fellowship
together,
is, is
someone, right? So this is fellowship. So I'm supposed to be the grand wizard here who knows everything. It turns out that I don't. So someone else is pointing out the source of something that I quoted, and I didn't know the source. So now we all know. So thank you. That's chavruta.
I mean, we in action. I think we should maybe keep going with sources, and then we'll wrap up with a set of Q&A at the end.
Okay, great. All right. So now the philosophers, and especially the Ba'alei Mussar, right? The Mussar movement, this movement of religious character formation that starts in the 19th century, mainly with Rabbi Israel Salanter, talks about where does friendship start, or what are some of the essential characteristics for friendship? And we've already mentioned some of them. One in particular was honesty. Okay. So I want to mention one which perhaps is not obvious to people, but is very important, and the philosophers understand this as well. Crucial to be able to being a friend is self-love. Self-love. Just to look at this passage in Mishnah Torah, we all know the verse, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as himself. But Maimonides says, each man, each person, is commanded to love each and every one of Israel as oneself. In Hebrew, it's kigufo. It's more concrete, like one's own body, but it's like one's own self. And if you think about that, what it means is that my love for others is an extension of the love for myself. If I haven't experienced self-love, it's very hard for me to extend love to others. Rabbi Moshe Rosenstein, who is one of the Baalei Mussar, says, you often find that people who have a hard time liking other people or saying good things about other people are people who don't like themselves. And if you don't like yourself, it's certainly going to be hard to see the good in anyone else. And so the philosophers, the Baalei Mussar, say the ability to form a healthy friendship is built on the ability to fully appreciate and love oneself. And this is also important in another sense, which is although in extreme cases we have to go the extra mile for our friends, we cannot negate ourselves in the service of others. And here, maybe let's go down a couple of sources, Stacy. Can you move slowly? Because I'm not sure. Not that one. Next one. Next one. Next one, sorry. Yeah. Wait, what was I going to say? I'm talking about right of ourselves. Yeah. So, yeah, this one works. So Cicero says, often important tasks compel us to be apart from our friends. Anyone who tries to prevent you from following through on a great opportunity because he can't manage his own sorrow at your absence is weak and unmanly by nature. Let's bracket the unmanly. And that is precisely what causes him to be unreasonable in friendship. So I want to read this from both sides. So one of the things that this passage is teaching us is it's wrong to ask too much from a friendship. If we ask too much, the friendship will not succeed. Now, tell me how much too much is. It's easier said than done. We'll come back to that in a moment. But the flip side of this statement is that I should not allow someone else to stop myself from being a part or doing something else because they demand it as part of friendship. That is not a healthy friendship. A healthy friendship is one in which both parties want each other to grow. It's also a friendship that is not rooted deeply in need, the kind of need that makes you feel that you can't exist without the other person. And unless you have that sense of separation and that sense of self and the generosity on the part of both people to help each other, but also to understand when another person's needs involve their being apart from me, all those are essential to a healthy relationship. Okay. Let's go back to I'm not sure now. Go back to, I think. Yeah. No, actually, let's go to the next one. Sorry. Okay. Related to this is something that Aristotle says. Differences arise when the friends do not obtain what they desire, but something else. For not to get what you want is almost the same as not to get anything at all. This is related to what I just said. One of the reasons that friendships unravel is that people want different things from the friendship, and they're not getting the thing that they want. And this happens in part because people have different understandings of what the friendship is. Gluckel of Hamelin, who lived in the 17th and 18th century, a German Jewish woman, was the first Jewish woman to write a memoir. She was married twice. At the time she's writing, her first husband is dead, and she only has wonderful, wonderful things to say about Chaim, her first husband. Not so her second husband. She has a lot of criticisms about her second husband. And she says, you know, when he wrote to me, when the courting was going on, I thought that he wanted a relationship that was full of affection. But it turns out that really it was a mercenary relationship. He thought that the marriage would be a good idea because together we would be a good economic unit. We would be able to succeed financially. And then she admits that actually that's what she had in mind. But nonetheless, she complains that she thought it was going to be a relationship of pleasure, to use the categories that we were using above. But in fact, it was a relationship of benefit. It was transactional. And so that's a great disappointment. Sometimes we misread other people. We think that they want to be our friends in a certain way, and then it turns out not so much. That they have a more diminished sense, perhaps, of what our friendship is. Maybe, how often are we going to see each other? How much time we're going to spend together? I have this idea, you have that idea. This is one of the ways in which friendships unravel. Let's take a look at the next source, please. Okay. Oh, sorry. No, we saw that already. Okay. So let's go down a little bit more. Not sure where we're going now. Let's continue. Next one. Okay. So here is really something that's very related to modern times, and Ellie related to it. So just to review, and actually let me add one more thing before we do this. So to form a friendship, I need self-love, I need honesty, the concern about my friend and the willingness to criticize, need realism about what the friendship is and isn't. I also need, and I wanted to mention this before we go on, didn't look at the sources, but I'm just going to mention it now, the ability not to be jealous. You know, people often say the truest sign of friendship is when you help someone in their hour of tragedy or need. I say the truest measure of friendship is how I act with someone in their hour of success. Because it's very easy to feel when someone else is succeeding, and perhaps succeeding in a way that I am not succeeding, to want to tear that person down. And a true friend is able to truly rejoice in someone else's success. And when that's not possible, the friendship falls apart. I mean, the very first relationship, again, it's a blood relationship, but it's a pure relationship. Think of Cain and Abel. Cain is jealous of Abel, and he's unable to be a brother and a friend because of that jealousy. And he ends up killing Abel as a result. Most of us don't end up killing people we're jealous of, but this can tear friends apart. If a friend is unable to say, yes, this friend has something that I don't have, they're successful in a way that I'm not successful, and I'm glad for that. Okay. All right, finally, what happens when friendships fall apart, and a little bit about why they fall apart. But if, as more commonly happens between friends, there is a change in character or interest or political views, we must take care that those who were once our friends do not become our enemies. For nothing is more disgraceful than to wage war against someone you once loved. So Cicero, first of all, is acknowledging that when friendships are based on X, sometimes that X disappears. Let's start with the first item that he mentions, the change in character. Sometimes a person becomes ill, or they become depressed to a degree that it's very hard to maintain a relationship with them. That may mean that the relationship will change, or it may even be discontinued, because it's simply, there's not enough common ground to be able to continue the relationship. I know that sounds terrible. My friend becomes depressed, and so I disappear. But you don't have to disappear, and that's part of the point that he's making here. But you're not going to have the same kind of friendship with someone who's ill in certain ways, or depressed perhaps, as you did before. It's going to change. And then interests. If I was very interested in going to the movies, and then at a certain point I say, no, I spend too much time watching movies, I'm going to start reading. And I have this friend that I went to the movies with all the time, and they still love movies. They want to go to movies. I say, hey, let's go to the movies. I go, no, I'm not going to the movies anymore. Well, that's going to put a real dent in that friendship. Political views. Well, this might strike a chord with some of us, as in today. What happens when either the views of our friends change in a way that we find sometimes, I'll just say the word, horrific, or we come to realize that our friends hold political views that are anathema to us. So I think here's the important thing that Cicero is saying. It may be that such friendships come to an end. It may be that such friendships are no longer sustainable. But we have to think about how we leave that friendship. And that's what I think he means when he says, we must take care that those who were once our friends do not become our enemies. If I discover that you have a political view that is absolutely anathema to me, and I come to the conclusion that if we disagree on this, our friendship really isn't going to work, because this is so basic for me, this is so important for me, that it's hard for me to be friends with someone who has such a radically different point of view. I have the choice of saying, and now you are my enemy. You have a political point of view that is diametrically opposed to mine. You are the enemy. But there's a second possibility. I've been a friend with this person for some time, and clearly this person has qualities that attracted me to this person. Clearly this person has qualities that I admire. Now I've discovered something that I very much do not admire. Am I going to let that cancel out all the good qualities that this person has? Or am I going to be able to say, we cannot be friends as we once were? But that doesn't mean that I cease to acknowledge the good in you and the good things about you as a person and as a friend. And I'm grateful for the friendship that we've had. And now we've reached this point where it's no longer possible. But to demonize the other person, to make that other person the enemy, is ungenerous and unfair. That at least is how I understand Cicero. So this is something for us to think about when we have difficult decisions to make in friendships, when we feel that we have to step away. How are we going to do that? Are we going to do that as friends or as enemies? That's the question that Cicero has raised. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, and but in doing that, I'm just going to remind us who can't review all of it again, the questions that we've been discussing, so you can go back over and think about it, which is defining different kinds of friendship, what qualities are important for forming and maintaining friendships, what causes friendships to unravel, and when and how it is appropriate to let go of friendships. These are the questions that we've been talking about. Okay, so now if there are questions, I'll be happy to hear it.
So one of our participants wanted to know if there was anything essentially Jewish about friendship, or what about friendship is unique to Judaism when compared to other religions? If you have any sense of, is it all that we are all in the same universe, this kind of universal language and approaching it, is there anything different that you're finding in Jewish sources?
So I would say two things, one that's good and one that maybe is not so good. I don't know if either one is good or bad. I'll just say that. The first thing is that we talked about this virtue friendship, and we said that it's a pursuit of the good. So of course, one of the things that distinguishes Judaism from Christianity, from philosophers, the mystics, is, and we saw this, your sense of the good. So what is the good that you are pursuing? So part of what is, I don't know if it's unique, but noteworthy about Jewish notions of friendship is that they are ideally rooted in Torah and in the study and the practice of Torah. And so that's not just true, by the way, in the Beit Midrash, the house of study, but also in the Beit HaKnesset, right? That gathering together in the synagogue, ideally, we should be getting together to form friendship, and that friendship should be based in becoming better Jews and better human beings through prayer, through gemilut chasadim, through study, through all of these different ways. So it's not really unique to Judaism, but what I would say is the particular ways in which this idealized kinds of friendship takes place and what are its parameters. The other issue to talk about, and it's really a whole other discussion, is that unfortunately, in my view, in Judaism, as in many faith communities and groups in general, the notion of friendship can be used exclusively. So in other words, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha is often read, unfortunately, as love your fellow Jew, not your fellow human being. And the rabbis even go as far as to say, love someone who is your friend in that they are faithful to the Torah. If you're not faithful to the Torah, then don't seek them out as a friend. So this seemingly expansive gesture, love everyone, can be interpreted as a narrowing, exclusive gesture. I think that's unfortunate, but it's a fact. And Jews are not alone in this by any stretch of the imagination. So this is a decision that we have to make as individuals and also as a community. How far should we stretch friendship? One of the books that I put down, Friendship in Jewish History, has essays about male-female friendships in Jewish history, Jewish and non-Jewish friendships in Jewish history, exploring how broadly the notion of friendship has been understood by Jews and by Jewish males over the course of history. And obviously, to a large extent, it's been narrow. It doesn't have to be that way. As I said before, we should be instructed by our texts and not paralyzed by them.
Suddenly, the Q&A board is just going crazy. So bear with me as I try and get through these. But it's lovely, and this is clearly resonating with lots of people. We're getting many comments about their own particular thoughts on friendships and friends and relationships, which has been really interesting. And I'll send those to you afterwards. But this is a question of clarification that I've got in a couple of different ways. Is there evidence of a friendship between women in Jewish texts? And because these definitions are so rooted in men's relationships, and then this questioner extends that to this question of, is it possible that men were also afraid of women's friendships? That this was kind of a scary, like, what do they do behind closed doors? What are they talking about there?
But the second part, I don't want to get into it, so I'll just say yes. Yes, it certainly is. We're always afraid of things that we don't know, right? Mind abhors a vacuum, and we fill in all kinds of stuff. Imagination's good and often not so good. But with regard to the first, I'll start off with the good news. The good news is I think there is a biblical model for friendship between women, and that, of course, is Ruth and Naomi. And the friendship of Ruth and Naomi is very interesting to think about in terms of the categories that we've documented here, because it really is a kind of friendship that spans all the different facets of friendship. If Ruth stays in Moab, she's alone. So it makes sense for her in terms of benefit to go with Naomi and not to be alone. She is a pleasant person and is good to Naomi. So it's a pleasurable relationship. But remember, at the end, when she declares her willingness to accompany Naomi, she says, Amech, Ami velokaich Elokai. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. So she's not just joining her and being close to her on a personal level, but also on a more transcendent, and one could even say covenantal level. I'm not just becoming your friend or confidant. I'm becoming part of your covenant. So that perhaps is the most beautiful example of female friendship. But I have to admit, I hate to have to say this, it's a real downer. But there's very little about friendship in the Bible. I mean, of course, the famous friendship, male friendship, is David and Jonathan, which deserves discussion unto itself. But most interpersonal relationships in the Bible are between relatives, and they rarely go well. I mean, make of that what you will. I'll just tell you quickly, once seeing a therapist, and I referred to the binding of Isaac, and my therapist was a Jew, surprise, surprise. I had no idea what I was talking about. I said, listen, Dr. Gold, your religiosity and your Judaism, it's none of my business. But you're a therapist. You cannot not have read Genesis. Everything that's in the DSM, it's all in Genesis. Every possible familial dysfunction, it's all in Genesis. You have to have read it. And I got him a copy of Walter's translation of the 5 books of Moses. And he let me know later on, obliquely, that he read it. But anyway, and that's sad. I don't know what to make of it. But really, the best I can say is the Bible is a cautionary tale. It's very hard to have healthy and lasting relationships. And family, of course, complicates it even more. That's why when we talk about these ideal friendships, Naomi and Ruth, well, they're not blood relatives. David and Jonathan, they're not blood relatives either. They're both in-laws in both cases. When we are family, it could be more difficult.
Yeah, I'm certainly thinking as we're about to encounter Joseph and his brothers and all of that interpersonal turmoil, but also you can see the growth in their relationships throughout. So maybe it's a way of modeling that question as well, that it's not, and just from as I want to give Judah a better time of things here.
But I do also give Judah a lot of credit, but I would just say at the end of the day, you go to the very end of Genesis, the brothers fear that when Jacob dies, Joseph's going to have them killed. And they say, probably lying, that Jacob had said to them, to share with Joseph, that he should not harm them in any way. In my book, that's not a happy ending. It suggests that whatever kind of reconciliation there was, there wasn't this sense of harmony and peace, that the past had not gone away. That's at least my reading.
Interesting. So back to this sense of correcting a friend or extricating yourself from a friendship or letting a friendship go away. One questioner asks, don't you think that there are friends' attitudes that change, political, legal, moral, etc., and it's reasonable to go beyond just ending the friendship to becoming an enemy? Some attitudes need to be fought against, not just abandoned. And maybe it's this question of, is it just that you can fight against those separately as an advocate, but still have a friendship that you can have 2 separate lives, or is that not possible?
So I feel like this is a certain kind of question that comes up all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like my answer is also basically the same. The answer is, of course, there are situations where someone with whom I was a friend, I discover marched on the Capitol on January 6th, for example. Well, that's going to be a heavy lift for me to be able to continue to be a friend with that person. But I think it's important for us to say, honestly, that's rarely the situation. It's almost always more nuanced than that. So yes, of course, there are times that people say and do things that make me say, I must dissociate myself from this person entirely, and I must come to the conclusion that I totally misunderstood who they were. They're a much darker person than I thought. But at the risk of being deemed a heretic, I think that a lot of the things that we disagree with now, well, I have very strong feelings, like everybody else. I think if we are willing to be understanding and generous, we should be able to say, I disagree with you vigorously, and I can understand why you might take that point of view. Or if I can't even do that, at least to say, when I look at you and the way you live your life and the way you've been a friend to me, I see that you are a good person. I can't understand why you have this point of view. Are there points at which that's not going to be possible? Yeah, but we shouldn't let that stop us from preserving respect and decency in those cases where we can do that. That's my fear, that we're going to allow the extreme to govern the moderate. So let's try as hard as we can not to break off any connection. And then sometimes we have to, and sometimes we may say, this person is really bad, they're evil. It happens.
As we're about to wrap up, I think there's this sense, and certainly you see this kind of becoming, and it's not new, but it's become, I think, more institutionalized, this idea of friends as family. You saw it a lot in pandemic, and certainly, people just had Friendsgiving as opposed to Thanksgiving, or, this is my sister from another mister, that kind of sense of fellowship and friendship as family. So is there a way of ritualizing that? And one person in particular asks, would it be possible to do, say, Yisker or mourn a yortzeit for a friend in the way that is a family responsibility? Is there also a responsibility to do that for your friends?
Is there a responsibility? I don't know. I would check Ritual Well online to see if there are such rituals. And I think there's much to be said for that. I'm going to end in a slightly, counterintuitive way, and to say, I think it's great to try and make friends our family. And unfortunately, in some cases, that's what we've got. We don't have family as family. Our friends are our family. But I want to challenge all of us to make our family our friends. That very often within our familial context, because there are so many feelings of jealousy or difference, we don't think of fellow family members as friends. And I challenge all of us to try and to find the ways in which we can make even those members of our family with whom we disagree friends in some way, not just people to be tolerated at Thanksgiving or what have you. And maybe what I'm saying sounds a little Pollyanna, but I actually don't think it is. I think part of what I'm saying is we have to work on our familial relationships just as much as we have to work on our friendship relationships. And in all realms of our lives, we should try to make people our friends. Some places it's easier to do, some places it's harder, but there's always value in trying to make that happen.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us today. One of our commentators said, We should have had this right before Thanksgiving. We missed the moment. So maybe we'll call you back and say, hey, we need to do this refresher on how to make family your friends, because clearly that is something that many of us are struggling with in this moment. Next week is the last session of our friendship series, and thank you to everyone who's been involved in this throughout. And we're going to be hearing from Dr. Shira Billet, who actually got us kind of kicked off on this topic with a symposium she put together last spring called Civic Friendship, and looking at if people on different sides of the aisle in our polarized society can maintain civic friendships. And so she's going to explore that topic in relationship to Hanukkah, which I think will build on a lot of the big questions that people had this week, and also kind of get us to a place of thinking, here's the interpersonal and here's the bigger societal. So thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next week.
Okay, thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody.